The voicemail came in at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning, and I know the exact time because I had just set my coffee down on the kitchen counter, and my phone buzzed against the granite with that particular sound it makes when something lands, while the screen is still dark. I almost didn't listen to it right away. I was running late. I had a site visit at 9, a client call at 11, and I'd already pushed my hair into a ponytail instead of actually doing it, which tells you where my head was. But something made me pick up the phone. Some reflex I still can't explain. And I stood there in my kitchen in Oakville, Ontario, in my work clothes with my coffee going cold beside me. And I listened to a woman's voice I didn't recognize say, "This message is for Leigh Harmon. This is a call from Northfield Family Medical regarding a matter that requires your urgent attention. Please do not discuss this call with anyone before calling us back. We'd like you to come in today if at all possible. Please ask for Dr. Yuen directly." That was it. 47 seconds, no explanation, no context, just a warm, careful voice telling me to come alone and not say a word to anyone. I need to back up. I grew up in Burlington, which is that kind of southwestern Ontario city that people from Toronto reference vaguely as somewhere past Mississauga, and leave it at that. My parents divorced when I was 11. Not dramatically, just quietly and completely, the way things sometimes fall apart when two people have simply used each other up. My mom went back to work at a dental office. My dad moved to Guelph and started over with someone younger. I stayed with my mom, got a job at 16 at a coffee shop on Brant Street, paid for my own school, supplies through high school, and told myself very early that I was not going to spend my adult life waiting for anyone else to steady the ground beneath my feet. I studied interior design at Sheridan College in Brampton. Not because anyone encouraged it, but because I'd spent most of my childhood rearranging my bedroom furniture and designing floor plans in the margins of notebooks, and at some point it stopped feeling like a hobby and started feeling like a direction. I graduated, worked for a mid-size firm in Hamilton for 4 years, saved every dollar I didn't have to spend, and at 31, I started my own residential design practice out of a rented desk at a co-working space in downtown Oakville. By the time I was 33, I had 3 steady clients, a reputation for not being precious about budget, and a small but real business that I had built without a single cent from anyone I knew. I am telling you this because I need you to understand what I had and how I had gotten it, because what happens next only makes sense when you know who I was before it. I met Tobias at a housewarming party in Westdale. He was a structural engineer who worked for a firm in Mississauga and had been living in the Hamilton area for 2 years after relocating from Vancouver. He was tall, dark-eyed, the kind of quiet that reads as depth rather than absence. He was standing near the back door of someone's kitchen, nursing a beer and looking mildly overwhelmed by the party in the way that I found immediately relatable, because I was also standing near the back door of someone's kitchen, nursing a beer and feeling exactly the same thing. I said something about how the host had made a questionable decision in painting the accent wall burgundy, and Tobias said, without missing a beat, the real mistake was the baseboards. You can't have that much visual noise at eye level and then just ignore what's happening at the floor. I laughed out loud. A structural engineer who had opinions about baseboards. I gave him my number before I left. We dated for 1.5 years. They were good, honest, low-drama years. We took a road trip to Cape Breton the summer we'd been together for 8 months and spent a week on the Cabot Trail, eating lobster rolls and arguing cheerfully about which side of the car had the better view. His parents, Deb and Frank, lived in North Vancouver, and when I met them at Christmas in our 2nd year together, Deb pulled me aside in the kitchen while the men were watching the game and said, quietly, "He's different with you. I don't know what you did, but keep doing it. I held that sentence like a small, warm stone. Tobias proposed in September on a Sunday evening on the back deck of our rented house in Ancaster. Nothing theatrical. He had made dinner, a pasta I'd been trying to get him to cook for months, because he always made it sound more complicated than it was. And when I came out to the deck with the wine, he was already there with the ring. And he said, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think the thinking is done. Will you marry me?" He said it the way he said most things, directly, without performance, and I said yes, before my brain had fully caught up with my mouth. We got married the following June at a vineyard venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Small ceremony, 62 people. My college roommate Becca as maid of honor, his brother Warren as best man. We had chosen the vineyard partly because of the light, and partly because neither of us wanted a ballroom, and it was perfect in the way that things are only perfect in retrospect, when you understand what they were the last of. Here is the part that matters, and I have turned it over so many times in the past year and a half that it has worn smooth, like a stone from a river. 6 weeks before the wedding, I had suggested we both get full health screenings done. Not because anything was wrong, not because I had any reason to worry, but because I had read something about it being a sensible thing for couples to do before marriage. And Tobias had agreed without hesitation. Actually, what he said was, "Yeah, that's smart, let's just do it." We found a private clinic in Burlington that offered comprehensive panels, including STI screening, and I booked us both in. We went together on a Thursday afternoon, both of us with work blocked out on our calendars like the responsible adults we were pretending to be. The results came back within the week. Both clear. We had seen the paperwork. We had both seen it. I had filed mine in the folder I keep for medical documents between my last dental x-rays and my eye prescription. So when a voicemail arrived from that clinic on the Tuesday morning after my wedding, asking me to come in urgently and not to say anything to anyone, I could not make it make sense. I stood in my kitchen, coffee getting cold, and I tried to build a logical explanation. An administrative error, a mislabeled sample, a routine follow-up that the receptionist had phrased badly. I told myself all of these things on the 40-minute drive to Burlington. And I believed approximately none of them, because the voice on that message had been too careful. That kind of careful doesn't come from a clerical mix-up. The clinic was quiet for a weekday morning. A woman at reception buzzed me in before I'd finished giving my name, which I also didn't like. Dr. Yuen met me in a small consultation room rather than an exam room. She was a compact, composed woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the very specific manner of someone who has spent years learning how to deliver difficult information without making it worse. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said. "Please sit down." I sat. My hands were folded in my lap. I was in my work clothes, the blazer I'd grabbed on the way out, hair still in the same ponytail from that morning. I looked like a woman who had left in a hurry, which was accurate. "What's going on?" I asked, and I was proud of how steady that came out. She opened a folder on the desk. She looked at me for a moment in a way that told me she was still deciding how to say what she needed to say. And then she said it. "The sample submitted under your husband's name," she said, "does not match his DNA profile from his intake registration. When your husband first registered with this clinic 2 years ago, we collected baseline documentation, including a genetic identifier as part of our fraud prevention protocol. When his panel was processed, our lab flagged a discrepancy. The sample we received at his most recent appointment was not provided by Tobias Harmon." The room was very still. Someone in the hall pushed a cart past the door. A phone rang twice somewhere further down the building and went silent. "Someone else," I said, "took his test." "That is what the evidence indicates, yes." I became very aware of the texture of the chair I was sitting in, the weight of my own hands. The way the fluorescent light in that room had a very faint flicker that I probably would not have noticed under any other circumstances. "Do you know who?" I asked. "The profile isn't in our system," Dr. Yuen said. "Whoever came in used your husband's registration information, his health card number, his intake form. They attended during his appointment window, so he gave someone his information. He sent someone else in." She looked at me with the specific, careful compassion of someone who has learned that there is no version of this that doesn't hurt. "That is the most probable explanation. Yes." I drove back to Niagara-on-the-Lake in a state I can only describe as very cold clarity. Not shock, not panic. I was thinking with a kind of precision I had never experienced before, and it felt nothing like calm. But it produced the same stillness on the outside. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the inn where Tobias and I were staying for our wedding night and the following 2 days, I had exactly 3 thoughts, and I had arranged them in order. First, don't let him see my face until I knew more. Second, call Becca. Third, don't do anything I couldn't undo. Tobias was still asleep when I got back to the room. I kissed him on the top of the head, told him I'd gone for a walk, and picked up coffee, set a cup on the nightstand beside him. I went into the bathroom and turned the shower on, and I sat on the edge of the tub and texted Becca, "Call me when you can. Don't mention it to anyone." She called in 4 minutes. I told her everything in a low, fast whisper with the water running. When I finished, there was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough for me to count 5 tiles on the wall in front of me. "Leigh," she said, "listen to me very carefully. Do not say anything to him yet. You need to know why before you blow this up, because the why is going to determine everything that comes after. What why could possibly be okay?" "None of them are okay," she said. "But there's a difference between a man who is hiding a disease and a man who is hiding something else entirely. Those are different problems. You need to know which one you're dealing with." She was right. She is almost always right, which is why she's been my best friend for 15 years. I spent the rest of our wedding mini honeymoon giving the performance of my life. I went to breakfast with Tobias and ate eggs Benedict and laughed at his impression of my uncle's toast, which had gone on for 11 minutes and included 3 separate rhetorical questions. I held his hand walking along the waterfront. I let myself be happy looking, which was different from being happy, and I knew the difference, and I held that knowledge somewhere very quiet inside me and did not let it near my face. We drove home Sunday evening. Monday morning, Tobias went to work. I rearranged 2 client meetings, poured a second coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table. The first person I called was a family lawyer named Pauline Chow, whose name I had gotten from Becca, just to understand what my situation looked like on paper. Pauline was brisk and thorough and had heard variations of this before. She told me what I was entitled to know and what to document, and she told me, firmly, not to confront Tobias without being prepared, because prepared meant protected. The second thing I did was go back through a 1.5 years of memory and hold each piece up to a different light. The trip to Vancouver last November, where Tobias had been distracted and a little short-tempered in a way I'd chalked up to complicated family dynamics. The nights he'd been later than expected, getting home from work, which I had attributed to a demanding project and never questioned because I was also often late, and I thought that was just what our life looked like. The one time I had mentioned the clinic screenings, the very first time, back when I'd framed it as something I'd read about. There had been a half-second of something on his face, too quick to name, before he said yes. I had noticed it. I had filed it as nothing and moved on. I texted Warren on Wednesday afternoon, casual. Just a note saying how much it had meant to have him there at the wedding. He replied quickly, warmly, said it had been a beautiful day, said Tobias was lucky, said he hoped we had an amazing trip when we got to the honeymoon they hadn't taken yet. Friendly, easy, nothing strange, but I was thinking about Warren. I had been thinking about Warren since the drive back from the clinic, since the moment I'd started asking myself who Tobias would trust completely enough to send in his place. They were close, the way brothers sometimes are, not constantly in touch, but deeply, durably connected in a way that didn't require maintenance. Tobias defended Warren reflexively. I had never thought much of it until now. I hired an investigator on Thursday. His name was Gary Pollock, and he came recommended through Pauline's office. He was a former RCMP officer in his late 50s who listened to everything I told him without expression, asked 2 very precise questions, and told me what he could find out and what it would cost. I agreed to the number without flinching, because I had a business savings account and an emergency fund, and I had earned both of them the hard way, and I was not going to let someone hollow out my life without understanding exactly what had been done and why. Gary came back to me in 10 days. 10 days during which I cooked dinner, watched television, slept in our bed, said, "I love you" every morning, which I had been saying every morning for a year and a half, and which now required something from me that I cannot fully describe. A kind of deliberate, reaching back into myself to find a voice that didn't betray what was sitting behind it. 10 days during which I got very good at a version of myself that was almost me. Gary sat across from me at a coffee shop on Kerr Street and slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, phone records, and a name I did not recognize. Heather Colman, 34 years old, lived in Burlington, 2 streets over from where I'd grown up, worked in pharmaceutical sales, had been seeing Tobias for 11 months. 11 months. We had been engaged for 14. I sat with that arithmetic for a long time, the math of it, the calendar of it, the fact that we had been picking out venues and building a guest list while he had been doing this. The fact that I had stood at an altar in front of 62 people, including his mother, who had told me that I made her son different, and he had known. The rest of it clicked together the way things do, when you finally have all the pieces. Tobias had been worried enough about what a real test might show that he had arranged for someone else to take it in his worried enough to involve Warren, who had gone along with it, because that is what people do for the people they love. The clean results had cleared the way. The wedding had proceeded, and I had filed the paperwork in the folder between my dental x-rays and my eye prescription and thought nothing of it. He had made a decision that put my health at risk. Not because he forgot to think about me. Because he had thought about himself first and I had come second, and that had been the calculation, and he had made it. And then he had looked at me in the vineyard at Niagara on the lake and said vows he had written himself. I called Becca. Then I called my mom, which was the hardest call, because she had loved Tobias in a way that I think had something to do with wanting the thing for me that she hadn't had herself, and I had to listen to her voice go very quiet before she found words. Then I called Pauline Chow and told her I was ready. I chose a Sunday. We had been married for 19 days. Tobias had suggested brunch at a place in Dundas that we both liked, and I let him make the reservation, and I let him drive. I watched him order coffee and look at the menu with the easy, comfortable manner of a man who had no idea what was coming, and I thought about the person he had seemed to be, and the person he actually was, and the distance between those two things, which turned out to be immeasurable. I waited until the food came. "I need to tell you something," I said. He looked up. He had a half smile, the kind you make when you're not quite sure of the tone yet. Okay. I went back to Northfield, the clinic in Burlington, the morning after our wedding. They called me. Did you know that they keep a DNA baseline on file for every patient? That they run a match when a sample comes in? I watched his face. Your sample didn't match, Tobias. The person who came in under your name wasn't you. The half-smile was gone. I also know about Heather Colman. The restaurant carried on around us. Someone at the next table was laughing about something. A server passed with a tray. The morning light through the windows was very ordinary and very bright. Tobias's face had gone the color of the white plate in front of him. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked like a man who had just watched every exit seal itself at once. I want you to understand something, I said. My voice was level. I had worked on that. I had stood in our bathroom the night before and practiced until I could say the words without my hands shaking. You didn't just cheat on me. You sent Warren in to take a medical test so you wouldn't have to tell the truth about what that test might show. You let me stand at an altar and promise things to you in front of everyone we love, and you knew. You made a decision about my health and you made it without asking me, because what it might cost you mattered more to you than what it might cost me. Leigh. His voice came out broken. He reached across the table. Don't. I moved my hands to my lap. My lawyer's name is Pauline Chow. She'll be in contact with yours. The marriage is 19 days old, and I have everything documented. The clinic, the investigator, phone records, photographs. If you make this complicated, I will not be quiet about the reasons. He said he loved me. He said it with the specific desperation of someone who has run out of other things to say. I know you believe that, I said. But you love your comfort more. You've known that for a long time. I'm just the last one to find out. I put my napkin on the table, picked up my bag, and walked out. Becca was parked on the street half a block away, exactly where she said she'd be, engine running. I got in and she handed me a Tim Hortons cup because Becca has known me for 15 years and knows that I handle things better when my hands have something to hold. She didn't say anything. She just pulled out into traffic and let me watch the Sunday morning streets of Dundas pass by the window while I processed what I had just done. I cried for about 25 minutes. I had told myself I was going to allow exactly that much, and I almost made it. The marriage was annulled 6 months later on the grounds of fraud. In Ontario, that process is not simple and it is not fast, but Pauline Chow was exceptional, and Tobias did not contest it, which I think had everything to do with what he knew I had and what I could have made public. I got my name back, Leigh Harmon, all the way through. Warren called me once about 3 weeks after the brunch. He was apologetic in a way that sounded genuine and ashamed. He said Tobias had told him it was just a scheduling issue, that he'd had a work conflict and needed someone to fill in, that it was a formality and nothing would come of it. He said he had not known about Heather. He said he hadn't known about any of it. I believed somewhere between half and most of that. I told him that loyalty to the wrong person in the wrong moment still had weight, and that he would have to decide how to live with his part of it. He said he knew. I told him I didn't blame him for loving his brother. And then I said goodbye, because there was nothing left to say that would help either of us, and I was done spending energy on things that couldn't be recovered. Tobias and Heather, as far as I know, lasted about 8 months after everything ended. Someone Becca knows mentioned seeing them together at a farmer's market in Burlington sometime in the late fall, and then didn't mention seeing them after that, and I stopped tracking it because the story had stopped being mine. I got my own screening done, a complete one, with Dr. Yuen, who was straightforward and kind about the whole thing without making it feel like more than it was. I came back clear. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot in Burlington and cried again, this time just from relief, the kind that's so pure it's almost physical. I found a different house, still in Oakville, different neighborhood. a semi-detached that needed work and that I could afford on my own because I had been keeping my finances separate through the entire marriage, not out of suspicion, but out of long habit. Out of growing up understanding that security was something you built and not something that appeared. I repainted every room. I redesigned the main floor layout because the previous owner had made some choices with the kitchen that were genuinely difficult to understand, and fixing them was the first thing I did that felt like myself again. I am not going to sit here and tell you I came through this without damage. I spent months waking up at 3 in the morning and going back through every memory I had of Tobias, cataloging every moment where I might have seen something if I had been paying a different kind of attention. The thing about a person who is genuinely good at deception is that they are genuinely good at it. There is no obvious thing you failed to notice. There is no moment where you should have known and didn't. There are just people who are skilled at managing what you see, and at some point you have to stop auditing your own perception and accept that you were deceived by someone who had practiced, and that this reflects on them, not on you. What I decided in the end was this. I had built everything I had from the ground up. I had done it once, from a coffee shop job in Burlington and a second-hand drafting table, and a belief that if I kept showing up and kept doing the work, eventually it would become something real. I had been right about that. I could be right about it again. My client list is longer now than it was when I was married. My business account is healthier. I have the same best friend and the same mother, and I added a rescued greyhound named Archie, who is profoundly unhelpful in a design studio and whom I love without reservation. I still do site visits on Tuesdays. I still get my coffee at the same shop on Kerr Street. Sometimes when the light in my living room comes through the front windows in a particular way in the early evening, and Archie is asleep on the sectional I picked out for myself, and the room is quiet and entirely mine, I think about that voicemail. The careful voice, the 47 seconds, the way I almost didn't listen. I have thought about what my life would look like if I had let it go to voicemail. If I had dismissed it as administrative, deleted it, gone to my 9 o'clock site visit and my 11 o'clock client call, and come home that evening to a husband I still believed in. Some truths wait a long time to be found. The ones that find you first are not always the ones you wanted, but they are sometimes the ones that save you.